zfmstereo.co.zw. And if you want to listen to us via an app, just download the TuneIn app and just look for ZiFM Stereo, and you can look for us live and in charge. Our WhatsApp number is 0731 168045. Our call-in number being 0772 168045. And this show is being streamed on our Facebook platform. Just go to facebook.com/ZiFM Stereo. And if you want to interact with us on Twitter, it's at ZiFM Stereo. Now, according to statistics agency Zimstat, Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate for the month of April shot to 75.86%, up 9 percentage points from March's rate of 66.8% rather. On a month-on-month basis, the inflation rate in April 2019 was 5.52%, up from 4.38% in March 2019. Inflation rate accelerated from 20.85% in October 2018, and prices of basic commodities continue to skyrocket, eroding the purchasing power of disposable incomes. In the studio today, of course, the economy being the focal point of everything that we're doing in the country. The big question, has the economic situation reached a boiling point? In the studio, I've got a human rights lawyer in Jeremiah Bamwe, and of course, the former finance minister and the current Public Accounts Committee Parliamentary Portfolio Chairperson, Honorable Tendai Biti. Thank you, both of you, for coming in. The first thing is, we've just got news a few hours ago that the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe announced that as of tomorrow, it has removed parity on oil marketing companies. Procurement of fuel will now be done through the interbank rate. Honorable Biti, what does this mean for me, the man on the street? Because when I looked at that statement, it had all sorts of jargon that I basically wouldn't understand.
Yeah, it's a dog's breakfast. It's unclear what they're trying to do, but obviously I think they're basically trying to say let me explain what has been happening first. What has been happening is that fuel companies have been approaching the central bank with bond notes and purchasing US dollars at 1:1 to allow them to import fuel into the country. So the bank is basically saying, you now have to access foreign currency at the interbank rate at the bank. And somewhere, I think in the third paragraph of that statement, they speak of the desire, the aspiration, or the anticipation that the interbank rate will be on par with the parallel street black rate. So I see a very crude attempt to liberalize the acquisition of foreign currency, if you like, to re-dollarize the acquisition of foreign currency by fuel importers. But there's a problem there. You can't dollarize or re-dollarize the aspect of supply without also dollarizing demand. In other words, when these companies acquire foreign currency at a market price, when they sell the fuel, they must also be allowed to sell it at a market price in US dollars to allow them to continue in business. So the bottom line is that it's an ill-thought move, poorly expressed, and given the fact that the bond note rate or the RTG rate is still 1:1. The bank can't do what it is seeking to do without actually legislative changes, amending the law, both SI 33 of 2019 as well as Section 43 of the Reserve Bank Act.
So you sit in a parliamentary portfolio committee on public accounts. What has stopped the amendment that you're speaking about?
The amendment has to be sponsored by the executive. So a minister has to bring in that amendment, i.e. the Minister of Finance, and that hasn't happened. And it's just typical everything that is being done by this government. Someone in a bar just thinks of something, and you just make it policy without actually thinking the process through And when you think the process through, you then look at cause and effect. You look at the opportunity cost. You look at you have a SWOT analysis, and then you look at the necessary legislative reforms that are necessary to actualize that policy. This is ill thought, and it won't work.
So, just to go a little bit into that particular statement, the Reserve Bank said of today it would inject $500 million in the foreign exchange market. What is the best way to make it work, given the system that has underperformed since its introduction in February?
Yeah, I have a problem with this central bank because it's very cynical. It doesn't have respect of the country's laws. At the beginning of this year, we brought, in February of 2019, we brought the central bank governor before the Public Accounts Committee. And one of the things which we impressed on him is that before he borrows any money from anywhere externally, he needs to comply with Section 327 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. He needs to go before Parliament to seek approval. And that, if he doesn't seek parliamentary approval, then any loan contraction is void and is invalid. So as a constitutional lawyer and as a chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee, I'm actually concerned about where this $500 million is coming from, because Parliament has not approved it. But even assuming, Larry, that this had been lawfully acquired and lawfully injected into the economy, why is it being injected? To address what? Because $500 million is a drop in the ocean in respect of the huge import bill, the huge requirements that the country requires. Fuel alone, just fuel alone, requires $1.5 billion a year. Then you've got medicines, then you have got fertilizers, then you have got basic inputs in industry, machinery, and so forth. So $500 million is a drop in the ocean. What we need, Larry, we need huge structural reforms, not piecemeal measures, not zigamba, patching up the economy. It's no longer possible to patch up. We have run out of skin to put patches on this economy. We need real structural reforms that are deep, that can address the huge challenges that this country is facing.
So I know you speak extensively, and I think your position on currency reforms and things of that nature are public record. The question I want to ask is, more often than not, the average person on the street hears this thing about you to refer to the creature that is called the RTGS and in those eloquent words, but very little is said about what's the safety net for the average person on the street while this is happening, for those who do not have access to US dollars, while as you propose re-dollarization. How do we make sure that people can access bread, can access public transport and things of that nature?
In the 90s, in particular in 1992, Minister Bernard Chitzero introduced ESAP in this country, the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. But at the instance of the IMF, ESAP had safety nets. ESAP had safety valves for the poor. Now Mutuli Mube has introduced a very ill-thought, a very crude, a very parochial, a very extractive form of ESAP, but without safety nets. And this is what he has done, which is terrible to the ordinary average person that you are speaking for, Larry. Number one, they've de-dollarized the economy by introducing a domestic currency, a fictitious currency called the RTGS dollar and the bond note. The net result of that is that the black market is shot up in very ugly terms and very ugly territory. I'm told that yesterday it was now trading at 1 to 7, 1 to 6.3. The net effect of that is to devalue people's salaries. So if you were earning $500 US, you are effectively now earning $75. So your salary has been devalued. At the same time, because they've commodified the US dollar, the advantages of dollarizing the economy is that the dollar ceases to be a commodity. But once you de-dollarize, the dollar becomes a commodity with a use value and exchange value. It has its own life on 4th Street. And once you commodify the US dollar, it means that because we are basically a supermarket economy for South Africa, for China, everything we eat or spend goes up because we are eating that which we are not producing. So fuel must go up, food must go up, even bread is costing $3.50. A bar of soap which used to cost in 2017 75 cents is now costing $10. So workers are now affected. It's a double whammy. Your wage is going down, but everything else is gone up. You spoke of inflation just a few minutes ago, and you said inflation is now 78 points. Larry, we now have the second highest rate of inflation in the world. The only other country which has got a higher inflation than us is Venezuela. We're even doing worse off than that pretense of a country called South Sudan. Our inflation rate is higher than. So workers are in trouble. Then you've got this thing called the 2% transfer tax. Then you've got the huge increases on fuel levy that were imposed by Mr. Mnangagwa on the 12th of January 2019. So it's ASAP Part 2, but without the safety nets that were in ASAP 1. So workers are suffering, families are suffering. There are no drugs in hospitals. Kids opened schools 2 weeks ago. Children are not going to school. So it's very sad, it's unfortunate, and it's unacceptable.
Okay, so you've prescribed the problem. The question still remains, what would you have done? What would you do because of the safety nets needed? Because ultimately, we still had a foreign currency shortage.
Yeah, Larry, the solution to this economy is very simple. It's very simple. Let's have structural reforms. So the first thing which we need to do is to scrap the RTGS dollar, scrap the bond note, and dollarize the economy. When you do that, prices will come crashing down because you are dealing with real currency. Number two, and this is very, very, very important. Number two, you must immediately and forthwith scrap the export surrender requirements. Scrap export surrender requirements, because this economy actually produces in all its downward status quo through the commodity sector, the mining sector. We are exporting over at least $5 billion worth of goods. So there's a lot of US dollars in this economy, but there's dirigism, there are distortions, there are controls. When you remove export surrender requirements, it means that there's a free flow. You deal with the supply side of US dollars. Number three, ring fence people's balances, which are in savings accounts. In 2007, 2008, this economy lost over $8 billion because of the tsunami of hyperinflation. We are on the verge again of a second loss brought by the introduction of the bond note and hyperinflation. So let's protect savings, let's protect pension funds, let's protect money in banks. Third, Larry, and this is very key, let's scrap the austerity measures, in particular the 2% tax, and in particular the fuel levies. And once you dollarize, you scrap those levies, because the price of fuel will be international. It will come down. 4, let's live within our means. Let's eat what we kill. The austerity that is required in this economy is the government tightening up and living within its means. Stop hiring these expensive jets. Stop creating distortions. The price of maize right now is now $726 per ton. We don't need those distortions. If you allow the market to settle, the price of maize will settle at US $70, US $150 per ton. So you cut the middlemen who are now making a killing out of commodification of maize. So living within our means, fiscal consolidation, balancing books is very key. 5, let's deal with the national debt, the sovereign debt. The sovereign debt right now is now 22 billion US dollars. It's unsustainable. So we have to make peace with the World Bank. We have to make peace with the IMF, and we need an upper tier staff monitored program followed with a HIPIC program that will result in the cancellation of our debts, in the cancellation of our obligations. Lastly, let's deal with 2 things. Number 1, it's infrastructure, our decayed infrastructure. We need 3 funds in this country. We need sovereign wealth fund, we need a reconstruction fund, we need a stabilization fund, and of course we need a social safety network fund to look after the poor in our society. So these things can be done as a matter of urgency, but I can't see Mr. Ngube doing it. I think the minister is out of depth. Whatever theory he has from having a PhD, it's fraudulent knowledge.
But what we have to be mindful of is that the access to the US dollar, this is what we come back to. And on 0731168045, someone's protein says, dollarize the economy, that's the only solution, Mr. Biti. How do you dollarize? Where will the US dollar come from? Because you've spoken on previous occasions about capital flight and things of that nature as being one of the big problems that came over the last 5 years, so to speak. How do you get to that if essentially we don't have access to that US dollar? And given those, and finally, to add to the question, given that these structural changes are not going to happen overnight, what happens in the meantime?
They can happen overnight. I started working the Government of National Unity on the 16th of February 2009. When I started work on the 16th of February, we had 4 million US dollars in the entire Zimbabwe. 4 million US dollars. By December of 2009, we had $1.8 billion. By the time I left government in 2013, there was 6.5 billion US dollars cash in this economy. It can happen overnight. 60% of it is confidence. Does the public, the investing public, the Zimbabwean public, have confidence in those that are governing them? If they don't have confidence, people will externalize and people will put money under pillows or in their human anatomy. They will not put money in the bank. There are 4 sources of foreign currency, Larry. The first source of foreign currency is our exports. We export gold, we export platinum, we export chrome, we export tobacco. The distortion here is that we are taking these people's money through export surrender requirements, which is why I said scrap export surrender requirements so that you allow the Zimplats of this world to bring their money freely and use it freely. So part of the reform is that you also need to liberalize the capital account, as I did in 2009. When you liberalize the capital account, people will have the confidence that we can bring in as much money we want into Zimbabwe and take it out. And on the contrary, when you liberalize the capital account, there's actually no capital flight. There's actually capital inflows because people have confidence. The stock market will be flooded by foreign investors who know that if I buy shares at Econet or Delta, I can repatriate my dividend. But once you put controls, there will be capital flight, and there's been capital flight on our capital markets. That's number one. Source of funds number one. Source of funds number 2 is overseas development assistance, ODA. As Minister of Finance, I used to get $1 billion US in overseas development assistance. It's a sign of confidence. Again, it's a sign of trust. So money can come through this country in the form of overseas development assistance. The third source of funding, Larry, is diaspora remittances. During my time, diaspora remittances were almost close to $1 billion US. That's a lot of money, Larry. The final source of is a foreign investment, private flows in the country. Again, once you make your monetary policy system work, you can't expect someone to come from China, to come from Canada, and put $400 million US in this economy, which he can't take out, or if he can take out, he's going to take in the form of the fiction called the RTGS dollar. So foreign investment can come in once you normalize our monetary policy. So the US dollar can come in from these 4 sources, but these 4 sources need trust and confidence in those that are running the economy.
But before I move on to our other guest, some people have said, and members of industry have said, look, dollarizing was chasing away investors because it was making us expensive within the region, which meant countries with weaker currencies were just more competitive.
Look, it's a very it's a very mendacious submission, because that argument is being made to make the case for de-dollarization. But who would deal with Zimbabwe when we are working with a fiction called the RTGS dollar, which even in terms of the regulations, SI 33 of 2019, is not defined as money. It's defined as a virtual currency. So if you ask an investor, would you rather deal with the US dollar or with the RTGS dollar? Certainly the investor will tell you that I will deal with the US dollar. The US dollar is an international currency. The US dollar is the currency of first preference globally. So that's why we need to use it. But I've already said on this platform before you, Terry, with your friend Chakravat, who I don't know why you are not calling us back. I've already said that the long-term solution for this country is not the use of the US dollar. It's adopting the rand, because the rand is weaker. So the rand deals with the fear that the US dollar is overpriced. And so I'm very clear. Let's dollarize the economy, but in the medium term, 5 years from now, 4 years from now, let's adopt the rand. But the rand is an international currency, but that is weak, and therefore that favors our exporters. But also bear in mind, Larry, that for our importers, those that are buying goods, the US dollar suits them, because it means that when they go to South Africa to buy their goods, the rand right now is trading to the US dollar at 14.2. So if you've got 100 US dollars, you've got 140 rands. If you've got 1,000 US dollars, you've got 14,000 rands. So it also makes our imports cheaper. So it creates a win-win situation for everyone.
I want to come back to you because there's a couple of questions that came in here, but I want to involve human rights law in here. I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions before we take a quick break. Jeremiah Bahamu, thank you very much for being part of the conversation. So as the prices of goods soar at the fastest pace in more than a decade, for example, according to other reports, we talked about the inflation. The question is this a safe environment for Zimbabwe in terms of a human rights point of view, especially with respect to access to basic foods and things of that nature?
It is not a safe environment for any Zimbabwean as we stand. But the real problem that we are having is that we are now in a situation of legal lawlessness, in the sense that the law is being used as the vehicle to rob the people of their hard-earned savings. And that is a negative impact on how they then enjoy their livelihoods. So one breach on any particular right has a ripple effect on every other right that they have. So let's take, for example, the economic rights that are being worst affected by the measures that the government is taking. If you are not able, if your salaries have been diminished and the price of goods are soaring, it means that your right to life is threatened. You then cannot afford to buy medication. That means your right to life has been threatened. Your right to housing is also affected because you then cannot pay your rentals. Your right to education is threatened because you then cannot pay fees for your children. So there is a ripple effect that goes on if we allow this trend to continue.
So when we talk about legal lawlessness, so what level is this happening? Is it exclusively at the highest levels, in business level? Is it also among the rest of the population?
It's a cancer that's beginning from the top and affecting the entire fabric of society.
So in the context of this, many people will ask about the honesty of the government in as far as saying it would deal with corruption, and also the honesty of the people to themselves in as far as how they also make whatever choices they make, whether it is, as Honorable Biti talked about, keeping money under mattresses and so forth. How does this affect this human rights situation that we're talking about?
Well, let's start by looking at what the preamble of the Constitution says. It says we want to build a nation, a prosperous nation, a just nation, which values the dignity of hard work. But if the salaries are being eroded and prices are shooting up, that dignity of hard work is taken away. And once it's taken away, people then resort to survival measures. They now need to survive. So they then become part of the problem. But the problem is emanating from a source, and the source is known. Government needs to redress the way it's handling things. It needs to redress the way it's handling our economy. And that way, we will have a better environment for everyone.
So you have a situation, and in fact, I'm going to take a quick break because I'm sure Honorable Biti would like to get into this particular one, because it's a story that developed over the last hour in itself. And some will argue, okay, it's part of measures to try and create a safety net or not. Is it actually a safety net? Will it actually be effective in helping the average person, that is you and me on the streets? ZiFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town.
Playing today's music first. Hit after hit. We're the station that beats
I can
all
see you
the
nodding.
competition.
Enjoy world-class radio online. ZiFM Stereo is available on TuneIn. Search for ZiFM Stereo and you got it.
The platform. Step up and speak up.
You're still tuned into ZiFM Stereo, my station, your station, the hottest radio in town. Larry Quidadai here with my guest, Honorable Tendai Biti, as well as Jeremiah Bamuth. And we are on until 8:30. We are talking about the status of the economy and the human rights aspect of it. What are the implications in as far as human rights are concerned with the current situation with the economy? And I've got a question here before I go on to the human rights question. This is targeted on Honorable Biti. Honorable Biti spoke of the Reserve Bank governor having defied the parliamentary committee on borrowing money. Since he seemingly broke the law, how will he be held accountable for that?
Well, regrettably, there are no penalties provided for in both the Public Debt Management Act, the Reserve Bank Act itself, and the Constitution for criminal liabilities against those who breach the Constitution, in particular, Section 327. There are also no civil penalties. But what we will do as a Public Accounts Committee is to recommend to Parliament to censor the Reserve Bank governor. But I think what is important is that if a citizen, my lawyer here, Mr. Bamu, if he were to bring a court action in the High Court of Zimbabwe and say, I'm a Zimbabwean, the Reserve Bank governor has breached my rights to equal protection of the law covered by Section 56 of the Act, of the Constitution rather, by going to borrow $500 million without parliamentary approval as is required by Section 327. And I want, as part of my protection, this loan not to be paid because there was no parliamentary approval. Mr. Bamu would win. And I hope that citizens who are listening out there should know that they've got a recourse against this government for failing to comply with the Constitution and with other laws.
So, how do we have a law that outlaws borrowing, but there is no form of recourse, legal? I mean, outside a class action.
It doesn't outlaw borrowing. Every government survives on borrowing. The United States government is the most overborrowed government in the world. It is borrowing outside Parliament. So they are borrowing outside Parliament. That's
yes,
where they,
so that was the intention of my question.
Yeah.
Sorry for phrasing it incorrectly. Yeah. How do we have it and there is no penalty for it?
The Constitution was constructed on the assumption that it's a normal democratic country. So if you have got a government that doesn't follow its own laws, that breaches the Constitution, the assumption is that come the next election, it will be voted out. Remember, our entire chapter 17, which deals with financial matters, we took it literally lock, stock, and barrel from the old Constitution, the Westminster Constitution. And the assumption there was that, look, if a government mismanages the economy, voters will pass judgment on election day. But we are now in a constitutional democracy We're not in a parliamentary democracy. We're now in a constitutional democracy where the constitution is the supreme law of the country. And anything that is done inconsistent with it is invalid. And which is why lawyers like Jeremiah Bamo are very key, and particularly lawyers from the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights are very key in ensuring and enforcing that provisions of the constitution is complied with. The parliament is important, particularly the committee that I chair, the Public Accounts Committee, because our function in terms of Section 299 of the Constitution is to make sure that every dollar that is spent within the four corners of the Constitution.
So I did make reference to something I wanted to ask that's been a developing story over the last couple of hours, where the government has said that it's ordering a 50% cut in bus fares, in the Zupco bus fares in urban areas. Can that be seen as a safety net in as far as assisting the people of Zimbabwe? Before I ask about the feasibility of it from Honorable Biti.
Well, two things arise. First, that's only affecting the urban areas. But what happens to people coming from Uzumba, Maramba, Fungwe? Are they going to get a similar cut in the transport fares from the...
Okay, let's deal with this one. Does this help? First of all, this particular one.
It does not help. That's the long and short of it all.
Now, I'm talking about, first of all, dealing with the urbanites before we talk about who isn't benefiting from it first.
My point is it does not help as long as those who have access to it is a limited number. We have more and more people who are not able to access even the Zupco buses that we have currently. Let's look at working hours and operating hours of Zupco, for example, and look at the industry opening hours. Some people still will be at work when Zupco is no longer available on the streets. So that does not benefit them in a way. It's a small drop in the ocean. We need more tangible
what I'm
measures.
saying is, does this assist? If it's able to become more widespread, is this a way that it could assist people if it became more as widespread as you want it to be?
If it becomes widespread, it will assist, but it will bring another problem with it. What is the source of funding to sustain Zupco's operations?
Okay.
Where are they getting the money from? Because we are getting back to overtaxation of the people. So you are robbing Peter to pay Paul. You are overtaxing the citizens so that they pay for the service again.
But somebody could argue, and this is me arguing for the sake of for the sake of understanding a lot better. Some countries with high taxation in the Nordic part of the world enjoy these benefits because they come back into the system as opposed to being used for some other thing that the people have no access to.
Well, I would agree to that to an extent, but let's look at the priorities. How many other things do we need, and will these taxes still benefit us in the long run? What are we doing to improve the medical side of things, for example? What are we doing? What measures are we putting in place to support education? What measures are we putting in place to ensure that we have safe and potable water in the cities and everywhere else? So there has to be a balancing act. We should not focus on only one issue because it's a sticking problem at that moment. But we should have a long-term vision that our rights have to be balanced and evenly enjoyed.
Honorable Biti, how feasible is something of this nature?
It's just a populist, an ill-thought populist measure that will not work. It will not work because, number one, we have a challenge of urban transport, and Zupco cannot and has not addressed. People will go to combis, people will use combis as they have been using. You know that in January 2019, they commandeered bus operators to surrender buses to Zupco. That experiment failed and it didn't work. A safety net, Larry, is something that cushions workers in areas that affect their day-to-day existence. What is required right now is a macroeconomic policy environment that protects the workers. So the first thing you need to do to protect the worker, give him a real wage, give him a real income. The RTGS income is not, it's an insult, it's an assault on the pocket of the worker, which is why I argue that the solution, civil servants who are calling for an increase in their salaries, it's a waste of time. What is required is just dollarizing people's salaries, and everything else will go down. Because when you dollarize, it means the worker has got a real value in his pocket, in her pocket. At the same time, it means that you have dealt with hyperinflation, because our hyperinflation is arising out of the fact that supermarkets and shops have to fill up their shops with the US dollar when the US dollar is not available, and people have to go on the black market to get foreign currency. Thirdly, Larry, we need to deal with the situation in schools. Kids are being chased away because there are no textbook, because teachers are not being paid. That's a safety net. We need to deal with hospitals. I came from Bulawayo last week on Wednesday, and I witnessed the terrible accident which Vimbai Changirai was involved in, 3 kilometers after Kwekwe. We spent 3 hours, 4 hours at Kwekwe General Hospitals. Painkillers were not there, and we had to buy painkillers from a pharmacy. Yet the poor nurses there, the poor doctors are working 24 hours without even gloves. So let's have safety networks in the hospitals. Let's have safety networks in the schools. 7 million people have to be fed this year because we've had a drought and we've had cyclone El Nino. A safety net, let's give food in schools, food in communities, because our people are starving. This is an unsustainable, as Bamu, as subsidies don't work when the economy has got so much distortions, and this 50 cents will not work.
Okay, this is directed to you, Bamu. The lawyer is intentionally refusing to be objective. The 50% cut will help. The extent is not as another issue, but it will help. The rural community does not commute the way urbanized do. What's your response to that?
The majority of our population is in the rural areas. Most of the produce that we use in the towns, at Mbaremsika for example, we are buying from markets supplied by the rural communities. So they are affected because they're the ones who bring us the tomatoes that we buy from Mbari. So they commute every day to sell their wares at Mbaremsika, and we in turn benefit from them. So that cut still affects those in the rural areas. And when we're looking at subsidies and safety nets, we should not only focus on the urbanites, because the law should apply equally to each and every citizen. When we create social safety nets, they should not be focused on one section of the society, but on each and every person in society. Because we are all equal. We do not become more equal because we live in the urban areas. We should enjoy the same standard of life as those in the rural areas.
So, getting back to what we're talking about, 0731 168 045. Do get in touch with us in the studio. Our calling number is 0772 168 045. Let's have the conversation. We're still together for the next 20 minutes, after which Chila takes over with our story. Now, we often talk about productivity in as far as the economy is concerned. How do we find a way as a path to productivity? And this is notwithstanding the fact that we had the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries President Sifalani Jabangwe here last week and said productivity, because of things such as the drought and things of that nature, had fallen by 60% from last year. How do we get the productivity that is there already to start picking up again?
The economy is mouse-eaten by so many distortions, Larry. It's a labor for love to be a businessman and entrepreneur in this country. So you have the challenge of inputs. We are operating on a regime of power cuts of 10 hours per day. The mining sector can't operate. Huge industry which consumes electricity is shut down. Sebo Chemical shut down 2 years ago because their electrolysis machines that convert ammonium nitrate into fertilizer could not operate. Mining houses are going to shut down. The Rio Tintos of this world, the Zimplas of this world, the gold producers of this country, because the energy system, the energy supply is whittled down to less than 350 megawatts, which is not sustainable. So you can't produce under those circumstances. Two, when you produce, you need a predictable and certain method of exchange your currency, your currency. Business people flourished and operated well under the medium of the US dollar. In 2011, this economy grew by 11.9%, 12%, which was the highest in the world. During the time of the GNU between 2009 to 2013, the average growth rate of this economy was 7.5%, which was the highest average in the world at the time. Why did that happen? It's because the inputs, the necessary ingredients, the symmetries of industry were functioning. What are those symmetries? The supply of energy, the supply of fuel, the supply of the currency, the US dollar itself. Now we have reversed all of that in one soup. So you cannot expect industries to operate. I run a law firm. We can't function because if it's not electricity, it's water. If it's not water, it's clients' money that we can't get from the bank. If it's not that, it's the internet that's not working. It's not an environment that is conducive for business. It's a predatory environment. It's an extractive environment. And that's why companies are shutting down. That's why there's disinvestment in this country. So to get Zimbabwe working again, we need serious fundamental structural reforms, some of which I've already spoken about.
0731168045. Someone's asking here, are we saying that we should give up on the idea of having our own currency?
I want to tell Zimbabweans something. There's this fixation with the currency. There's no country in the world except Panama in 1904, which has de-dollarized, in other words, adopted its own currency after involuntary dollarization. When you dollarize, as we did, not in 2009 when we formally jettisoned the Zim dollar, we dollarized in 2007, in 2008, when the public itself rejected the bearer check and started using the US dollar. It's economics of confidence. Zimbabwe is in a crisis of confidence, a trust deficit. The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagrante. When you catch your husband or your wife in flagrante committing adultery, trust is gone. The US dollar, sorry, the Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagrante. Zimbabweans will never have trust to it. What you can do, which has worked in other countries, you can have your own currency, but running parallel with the US dollar. So it just becomes a means of exchange, the way the bond coin was, not the bond and not. So I can't possibly see our own currency sustaining itself in this economy. That's why I said at the beginning, let's go back to the dollar, the US dollar, because that's what people want, and it worked for them. They trust it. But in the long term, let's go to the rand. The Zimbabwean economy is inextricably connected to the South African economy. Our people understand the rand. Most of them, the first country that they go to when they leave the Zimbabwe is go to South Africa. And joining the Rand Monetary Union has got the advantage that you can actually have your own currency playing a role of intermediation in your domestic economy. But bringing the Zimbabwean dollar on its way on, it won't work. It has never worked anyway because it's a trust issue. The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagrante, naked, with its pants down in 2007, in 2008. Trust will never be restored into the Zimbabwean dollar again. More so under the present political circumstances. Larry, we've gone through currencies like diapers. We had our own Zimbabwean dollar, which in 1980 was equal to the British pound. The US dollar was 120 to the Zimbabwean dollar. We bastardized the Zimbabwean dollar. Then the bearer check, we bastardized the bearer check. By the end of December 28, we were printing $100,000 trillion note, which could buy you 2 bottles of soda. After the bearer check, we went to the US dollar. We bastardized the US dollar. We bastardized the rand. Then we introduced the bond note. We have bastardized the bond note. Then we introduced this thing called the RTGS dollar. We're going to bastardize it tomorrow. Even under the current circumstances, you can bring the renminbi, you can bring the yuan, you can bring the euro, you can bring the pound. We'll bastardize it again.
So are you saying that there's only one singular thought? It's a US dollar, in spite of the fact
under
that...
the right conditions.
But
Under the right macroeconomic conditions.
It does come back to the issue once again, though, that by about 2015, even a little bit before that, some capital flight had already started taking place. That by the time the bond note was introduced, it was because we did not have the US dollar circulating within the system.
Yeah.
It's
a good question, Rand.
So the question is, then are you also saying that the US dollar itself was bastardized, given the fact that you're talking about
it was
even within the period of your being the finance minister, in that period, the cost of products that we needed to buy, whether it was the cost of bread, whatever the case may be, was still above what the market, within the region was being paid for.
Yeah, Larry. There are some people who think that the US dollar is a panacea, and that the work which we did during the GNU was solely as a result of the US dollar. It wasn't. I said you have to have the right economic conditions. There's something we did, and we did fantastically well during the GNU. It was sound macroeconomic management. When I used to say we eat what we kill, people didn't understand what we actually meant, what it actually meant. It meant that we had to balance our books. We had to keep a tight fiscal policy and not an expansionary fiscal policy. What happened after the collapse of the GNU from 2014 is that the government ran an expansionary fiscal policy. The government operated on a budget deficit which was floating between 9% of GDP to 30% of GDP. They started issuing treasury bills like confetti. The current stock of treasury bills right now is $7 billion. So what did they do? They increased broad money supply, M3, to about $11 billion. But it was fictitious money. It was a Ponzi scheme. It was RTGS. So civil servants were not paid in hard currency. They were paid in RTGS. But that was transactional. That was just a mirror transactions. So by the time that they introduced the bond note, they will introduce the bond note knowing fully well that through an overzealous expansionary fiscal policy, they'd wiped out the US dollar. So the problem was not the US dollar. The problem was bad economics, terrible economics.
So
and which is why I said we need a holistic bundle of reforms to stabilize this economy. But at the epicenter of this structural reform are three things. Number one, macroeconomic stability. We eat what we kill. Number two,
I heard what you say, but I do need to ask this as a follow-up
jetsoning the RTGS dollar.
But what I'm
or the
saying
bond
is
note.
that, aren't you, then wouldn't it by the same token be possible to say that if you have the same kind of reforms that you're talking about, or the major structural reforms, you could create an environment in which a local currency could be sustainable?
It will. You see, the RTGS dollar, the bond notes.
No,
not
necessarily that. I'm saying whichever, whether it's a Zimbabwe dollar that comes in 6 months or 6 years.
Yeah, economics is 40% technical management. 60% of it is confidence, it's trust. So the bond note, just like the bearer check, just like the RTGS, has become synonymous with mistrust, has become synonymous with abuse. So jetsoning it is a major, important signal of trust, signal of confidence, signal that we can do business. So that's why you need to jetson it. In the long term, when all the fundamentals are there, you can bring your currency, but alongside a major currency. On its own, the Zimbabwean dollar will never be back and will never work. On its own, it will never work.
But I understand you up to a point. This is just for the clear understanding, because as I said, I understand you up to a point. The fundamental aspect where that many people have been arguing is, and business has been arguing. I say business is ill-advised in saying that the panacea is a local currency, because you can create monetary policies around it.
Let me go now into deep economics, Larry. The world abandoned the bullion-backed currency in the 70s. So all currency became fiction. The American dollar itself is fiction. It's not backed by gold, as used to be the case before the 70s. But what backs the American dollar is confidence and total trust. It's trusted in Beijing, it's trusted in Laos, in Cambodia, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in South Sudan, in Eritrea, in Somaliland, where you hardly can speak of a state. Now, when you introduce a Zim dollar, this Zim dollar is not going to be backed. It's going to be crazy for a poor country like Zimbabwe to build a huge stockpile of dollar of gold to back up that currency. So how do you back this currency? You can only back it when you link it to a currency which is already trusted, the rand or the bond. So if you bring and introduce the Zim dollar today, right now, it will collapse because it's not backed by anything. Look at our current account. Our current account is in deficit. Our current account is 25% of GDP. So how would you introduce your own currency under those circumstances? And these business people, they forget yesterday. Yesterday we had the bearer check operating under circumstances where with a huge current account. A huge current account of 7-1. For every dollar that came into Zimbabwe in the form of exports, $7 were going out in the form of imports. It doesn't work, Larry. It doesn't work. It's feja economics. It's food economics.
So
it doesn't work.
I want to come back to Jeremiah Baum here. During the State of the Economy presentation in Parliament last week, Finance Minister Professor Mnangagwa called for calm and more time to improve the country's economic situation. With exact words, I urge citizens to be patient. Economic reforms don't work instantly. How important is it, given the situation?
Well, Mnangagwa said the same around October 2018 when he asked for just 6 months. We're well out of the 6 months. I haven't seen anything positive from him, so I find it difficult as a person to trust what he says. We will give him patience, we will give him calm, but he's been minister for long. What positive benefit has he brought to this economy? We are in this situation because of the policies that he spearheads and adopts.
And as a follow-up question to that, the business community came out and said in a statement that was signed by the CZI that there was a need to bring back the TNF, the National Forum, Tripartite National Forum, to negotiating forum. Is that feasible within the current environment?
The Tripartite Negotiating Forum is feasible. It can still be done, but it does not address the economic problems of the country.
But their argument is to say at the moment people are not talking to each other. Labor is not being taken care of. No one is sitting in the same, office and say, okay, how do we make sure that the businesses themselves say they need to find a way to instill discipline within themselves, and government also needs to find a way to find discipline themselves, and then improve what labor has got access to in as far as spending power is concerned. Isn't that a positive move to say, look, let's stop talking in our silos?
Well, the TNF, I actually believe it's still ongoing. It's a forum that works, but it's been focusing mostly on labor law reforms. It's more dealing with how to regulate the relationships between labor, capital and labor, with government playing a regulatory role to ensure that they evenly balance their rights in between them. But it does not address the economic problems, because when we go to wage negotiation forums, the employers, the industries will always be saying, we are lacking productivity because we do not have raw materials, we need to import, we do not have access to foreign currency, etc., etc. These are the excuses they are giving to the workers for failing to raise workers' salaries. So the TNF on its own is not a panacea to the problem. The problem that we have must be addressed in the economic realm, in the political realm. The TNF could play a part, but it will not play the big part that we would want it to play.
So then, why I need this to come out clearly is that the lack of understanding around what which arm of the TNF is, and the lack of trust that exists between the different parties. Can this move the conversation forward? Because me sitting at home, I hear about this in high-sounding words. I hear about it in clever-sounding words that I don't understand. Can it move the conversation forward? I know we're talking about the economic fundamentals that have to be dealt with, and maybe there might be a clearer understanding of how, business works from labor when they talk directly to them within that kind of forum. Can it work on a significant level beyond being a talk shop?
Not on a significant level, and the reason why it will not work on a significant level is simple. The unemployment rate in Zimbabwe is high. So when you are speaking of the tripartite negotiating forum, you are speaking of the representatives of labor, you are speaking of the representatives of the industries and government coming in. So if labor or formal labor is a small portion of the population, I'm not sure of the statistics, but I think our unemployment rate should be over 75%. So you are only focusing on 25 or less percent of the population, hoping that they will address the problems suffered by the rest of the population. That will not work. It will only address industrial relations between the employer and the employees. Government is only assisting to regulate that process, and also bearing in mind that government is the largest employer in Zimbabwe.
Honorable Biti, before we go, I know sitting at home, I'm thinking there seems to be no way out of this. I can't think of a way out of this. Is there a way out of this that's possible? Or are we heading for Venezuela?
I think that there has to be political dialogue, particularly between the president of ZANU-PF, Mr. Mnangagwa, and the president of the MDC, Mr. Nelson Chamisa, Advocate Nelson Chamisa. That genuine political dialogue can create a soft landing in Zimbabwe, and that dialogue must create some transitional mechanism, a national transitional authority, to move this country forward, Larry. We are all crying for that. We are all praying for that. Because if we don't have that, yes, you are right, we're heading for an Armageddon. We're heading for a Venezuela. We're heading for another November 2017. People are angry out there. People are starving out there. Professionals are angry out there. Professionals are suffering. Businesses are collapsing. There are no drugs in hospitals. There are no textbooks in schools. So the nation is itching with anger. We need genuine dialogue as a matter of urgency between the political heavyweights of the MDC and ZANU-PF to resolve the country's challenges. If we're going to bring everyone on board, so be it. But ZANU-PF, led by Mr. Mnangagwa, must be there. MDC, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, must be there. If we don't have that, Larry, it's Armageddon.
That's the voice of the former Minister of Finance and the current Public Accounts Committee Parliamentary Portfolio Chairperson, Honorable Tendai Biti, and before him, human rights lawyer in Jeremiah Bamwith. Thank you both of you for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Coming up is Chila with our story. I'm back with you tomorrow between 8:30 and 9 p.m. Stay tuned to ZiFM Stereo, my station, your station, Artist Radio in town. And as I always say, from where I come from, my name is Vali Kwiderai. I still be Sasebenza. Take care of yourself.